Over 7 million different animals inhabit our planet.
Episode 1, elephants. I got to pick. I'm sorry.
I think that's a great pick.
Next week, or next episode is yours, right? Rhinos, those are your babies. But elephants are my babies, and I think in the first episode that I recorded.
What can they teach us?
They also are very emotionally intelligent. There's been documentation both in captivity and the wild of elephants experiencing joy, anger, of course play, but then also grief.
Yeah.
So that's
Many species are in crisis and need your help. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.
So welcome to the All Creatures Podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Angie.
Yeah, so Angie, this is our first one together.
Super excited.
I know, this is awesome. It's, we've been planning this for a long time, and I'm so just energized to get this going. You know that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun and a lot of good build-up and really interesting research.
Right.
I've learned a lot, and I hope to share that with everyone.
Right. And I think the history of Angie and I, the reason I'm doing this is because of Angie.
Aww.
When Angie showed up years ago.
Shucks, you're too sweet.
That's true, though. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have switched from domestic species to really focusing on these endangered species.
Yes. Moving into the from the dark side to the...
Yeah, come to the light.
Yeah.
But we, we're both excited to be bringing this podcast to everyone. And so episode 1, elephants. I got to pick. I'm sorry.
I think that's a great pick.
Next week, or next episode is yours, right? Rhinos, those are your babies. But elephants are my babies, and I think in the first episode that I recorded, I talked about how elephants were, I just love them. I just love elephants. I don't know if it's because I'm tall, I'm 6'5", I'm a tall guy, the gentle giant.
How can you not love elephants?
I mean, they're so amazing. They're awesome, and so we need to fight for them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, enough with the pleasantries, but we want to jump right into the show and talk about this amazing species. And, we've kind of laid out how we want to bring the show to you and talk about, I think the first thing we would love to talk about is their history. And I don't want to scare you off, Angie.
Uh-oh.
But I'm going to talk about mitochondrial DNA.
I think I might have fallen asleep already.
Yeah, I think. No. Just bear with me, please. But why mitochondrial DNA of all things? And I think it would be good to kind of lay this out because we'll refer back to stuff like this throughout, I think, this series or as long as we're podcasting because that's how we're evaluating the evolution of species.
Sure. Well, and I think this has something to do with the DNA you inherited from your mom.
Right.
So...
Okay.
You haven't lost me quite yet.
Okay, so you weren't completely asleep in genetics.
No.
Yeah. And Angie is almost done with her PhD. Like, she's just there at the end. And so she will be Dr. Adkin here pretty quick. So mitochondrial DNA, Angie. It's amazing because, you know everything. You know physiology. But physiology, we're made up of cells. Mm-hmm. You have a group of cells that come together. Some of them form organs, blah, 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 throughout the body. We don't need to get that much into it. But cellular biology, within a cell, you have your chromosomal DNA, which is all your inherited stuff that makes us who we are, makes me 6'5", brown hair, brown eyes, all that stuff. And then you have this mitochondrial DNA that's outside the nucleus and this mitochondria.
Right, it's in the mitochondria,
right? So those are parts of the cell. So it's a really weird...
It's different.
It's very different, and it's very unique. So in each cell of all of us, we have this mitochondrial DNA that we get from mom. Dad gives us none.
Yes.
Okay.
Mom power. Yes.
Right. Just try to follow me. So what's unique about this mitochondrial DNA is it rarely mutates or changes. So this is why we can evaluate evolution changes over time. So mitochondrial DNA, you get about one change every 100,000 years.
Wow.
So one mutation.
Wow.
Chromosomal DNA, you get about 64 mutations per generation.
Right.
So every 25 years...
A lot more rapid.
Yeah. So it's really hard to trace. This mitochondrial DNA changes so slowly that we can go back and look and trace lineages. So like the human mitochondrial DNA map, they've traced it back to East Africa. That's where we all originated from.
The
Homo sapien, right.
Yeah.
So they've looked at that. So anyways, mitochondrial DNA, and you can read more about it online. I don't want to scare people off, but, we use that as a tool in science to look at this. And so the reason I bring that up is we've used mitochondrial DNA for elephants. You know what a mammoth is, right?
I've seen a mammoth at our local museum.
Yeah, there you go.
My son loves them. They're pretty impressive, to say the least.
And you know me, I love talking about mammoths. And, there's people out there wanting to clone the mammoth, and we'll save this discussion for another day because This is
Chris's favorite thing in the whole world to talk about.
I would love to clone a mammoth, but I think
it's good to have goals, right?
Yeah. But it's an incredible waste of money. We need that money to preserve African and Asian elephants.
We already have, yeah.
It would still be cool, but it's a waste of money. All right, so we'll save that for the other day. But we've used mitochondrial DNA to look at mammoths, mastodons, and how they relate to African and Asian elephants, right?
And just quickly remind me, what's the difference again between mastodons and mammoths?
Yeah, so it's really cool. Mastodons, which is like its own almost elephant species, they diverged 26 million years ago from the elephant tree, I guess you could say. And they became their own species. And they populated North and Central America. Okay. The mammoths were more Asia, Europe, Africa.
So a little smaller?
Yeah. Okay. So but they didn't diverge out until about 7 million years ago. And there was a split in the tree, in the elephants. And then you had African elephants splitting off about 6 million years ago. Then you had the mammoths, and then finally Asian elephants split off about 5 million years ago.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So the mastodons, completely their own species, 26 million years ago is insane. So So you had the mastodons and the mammoths. And people always thought they were kind of the same thing, but they weren't. And the mastodon probably looks more like a modern elephant.
Okay, that's what I would think.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the mammoth is more of what we know as mammoths, the woolly mammoth, the big tusks and everything. All right, so what we do know about mastodons is they were more forest dwellers. Okay. Which, you and I that deal a lot with animal nutrition, we know they eat more trees, limbs, bark.
Like browsers almost.
Right, browsers. And so their teeth, they have if you look at their teeth, it's really crazy. It's almost like they're built to munch those branches, right? And chew them up and chew the pulp.
Okay, like grinding type mechanisms, yeah.
And then if you look at mammoth teeth and then our modern elephants, Asian and African elephants, they're more grazers.
More flat-based.
Right, flat-based. So really you had that. Now the mastodon went extinct about 10,000 years ago, into the Ice Age. The mammoth went extinct only 4,500 years ago.
Oh, interesting.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Like when they built the pyramids.
Maybe we can clone them.
Yeah, I know. So it's pretty crazy with the mammoths. Those are our relatives, ancient relatives of today's elephants. Now, within today, we have two species of elephants. You have the African and the Asian, right? Which most people are pretty familiar with. So the African is Loxodonta africana. It's a big word. Yeah. You know me with my saying. They're big animals. Yeah. And then, but I love the Asian elephant's scientific name, Elephant maximus. Yeah. Which is really cool. So the difference between, the African, they're larger. They're larger than the Asian. They have larger ears. And within the African elephant, they think there's two species.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about is it the forest dwelling African elephants over in the Congo, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, so you have the forest dwellers.
Smaller.
They're a little bit smaller, and they're the ones that are getting poached left and right pretty bad too.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Yeah, pretty bad. It's a bad place on Earth. But they think those are two separate species. There's still some debate. Okay. So they're not quite sure. And then they have the Asian elephants. So there's really three main subspecies. You have the Indian, the Sumatran, and the Sri Lankan. Okay. Yeah, which is weird. So they have three. I
guess I'm not as familiar with the subspecies of the Asians.
Yeah, and if you think of it, it's weird because if you think about it, you have all these Asian elephants on Sumatra, right? Yeah. And how did they get there? How long ago did that break off, or the land bridge? Right. So that's always interesting to think about. And then Indonesia, all the islands of Indonesia. When did that land mass emerge, and those elephants got kind of isolated populations.
And with the Sumatrans, are they smaller than the other Asians? I know in the rhino world, the Sumatran rhinos are smaller than what we typically think of some of the other Indian rhinos.
Yeah, I believe so, because I think the Indians are the Indian elephants are the big Asian ones that we see.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then you have these smaller populations or smaller elephants. a couple things that are really interesting about the African and Asian is, the African, if you look at their historical range, in the early 18th century, there was estimated about 27 million African elephants.
A lot.
Yes, a lot. And if you look at the map, and I'll link the map in the show notes when we post them, but their historical range was like pretty much all of Africa.
Right.
You take out some of the desert regions, even though there's some desert elephants.
Yeah, there's a lot of different climates, a lot of different topography. It's a very big continent.
Right. But they covered most of it.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So then if you look at today and look at where they are, the population's estimated about less than 500,000, and there's small pockets in Africa. And most of them are on like reserves and stuff.
Yes, yeah, that's, from my experience over there, that's where it seems. There's a lot in the national parks, is under a lot of protection, is where you're going to find the larger herds of, 100 plus or whatnot. But yeah, it's very, very fragmented, their populations.
And you were there, right? You've seen them. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I've had the pleasure of going to Africa on 2 separate occasions. And on each trip, I was able to view elephants in the wild. Right. And it was extremely impressionable, to say the least. And one thing to see elephants, which I'll touch on a little bit more when I'm focusing on some of my notes, but it's one thing to see elephants in a captive setting or in a circus, which is really cool because you can get up close to them and really watch their behaviors more intimately. But seeing an elephant in the wild where it's supposed to live is very impressionable and very exciting. And oh my gosh, if you even have an ounce of interest in wildlife, Africa is where you should go. It should be on your bucket list for sure. Yeah. At least while we still have it.
I know, no kidding.
Yeah, but very, very impressionable. I actually saw a male during his breeding season in full must, and it was impressive. And my guide was a little rambunctious. Was a little rambunctious and got a little too close to him, which was made great for some photos that I have hanging on my wall this day. But he did get a little aggressive with us, and we had to zip right out of there. Rightfully so, because we shouldn't have been that close. But very impressive animals. And I have not been over to Asia, so that's also on my personal bucket list because there's a lot of great elephant viewing there too. Right. And sometimes in a different setting, and I'll touch base on it too a little bit more, but a lot of times the Asian elephants can actually be used in the tourism industry, like if you want to go find tigers and stuff. But yes,
go find tigers.
I know we have a few take-home messages today, but one of mine will be if you have not seen these creatures in the wild, and it should be on your bucket list. Obviously, start first with zoos and conservation centers, but
right.
The wild is unfortunately, as we'll touch base on, is not so wild anymore. So
I know, and that's what kind of talking about conservation and looking at that map, that map of where they're located in the pockets. But in the first episode, I talked about 100 elephants a day are poached, African elephants, right? Because very few Asian elephants, they're a smaller population, but African elephants, you're seeing 100 of them poached a day.
Yeah,
so you're talking 30,000 a year. When we only have 500,000 left on Earth,
it's not sustainable.
No,
folks.
in 10 years they're gone.
Yeah,
right. They're gone, and people are scared, and I'm scared, and that's why I want to talk about elephants because they're on their way out.
Right, and here I am promoting everybody needs to go to Africa and see these animals in the wild, but in the same instance, at this rate, my son will not be able to see them, let alone my grandchildren.
No. So
that's why I'm here today.
Yeah, it's really disheartening. But that's where we're going to fight and see what we can do. The Asian elephants, really, their range is, habitat loss has gone way down. It's a much smaller population. They figured in 1900 there was about 100,000 Asian elephants. Today there's about 50,000, maybe as low as 40.
Right.
Not many of them in the wild because we have tamed a lot of Asian elephants.
Sure. They've been domesticated, for lack of better words. Yeah,
last few thousand years. So I think Asian elephants are a little better off as far as surviving.
But their numbers are a lot lower.
Right, a lot lower, a lot smaller population. And that's natural. They had a smaller population anyways.
Okay.
But being that they are used for human use, in agriculture, or I guess forestry. They use them quite a bit. The tourism.
People might be looking out for them a little bit more.
Right. I think they start. I know there's still Asian elephant conflicts with humans.
Oh yes.
And they are killed and poached for ivory.
Of course.
But a lot less than say the African. So Angie, tell me about elephants and humans.
Okay. Well, it's a long history, so I won't bore you with too many details, but going back to even the Bronze Age, Asian elephants, as you touched on before, slightly more used as a working animal.
Right.
And that's historically documented through the Bronze Age. They're typically used a lot, even in its current day, for logging and pulling heavy things. Obviously, they're very strong and they're very big. But the other thing, too, is in the current day, they're used a lot in tours in Thailand, from just touring people around national parks to even going to look for tigers on an elephant's back. They're definitely, like you said, they have this great history with mankind of working with them. And once again, like you said, man kind of looking out for them the same way we do for our other domesticated animals, such as cows and horses and whatnot. A long-standing history of working alongside them, and of course, mankind benefiting off of it.
Right.
And then, interestingly enough, too, not from a tourist perspective, but a fun little fact is there is a coffee company in Thailand called Black Ivory Coffee that actually uses Asian elephants, to consume the coffee bean cherry.
Oh, wow.
Wait for it. And they digest them, and then the waste is collected, and it's supposed to make the coffee taste more robust once it's been cleaned and processed.
Okay.
So...
Here's elephant poop coffee. All right.
Pretty much.
We'll put that on the website.
Yeah. So that's the thing is they've been working along mankind for a long time, doing different various things. And then isn't that interesting? I want to try it myself.
Elephant poop coffee.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good gig, though. Just hang around and just for the record, too, this the caffeine is not absorbed, so these elephants are checked by veterinarians, and it doesn't seem to have any negative impact on them. So, hey, it's probably better than being in the wild and being poached, right?
That's true. That reminds me of, sorry, and I was going to say this later, but since we're talking about elephant poop and digestion, but I think it's worth bringing it up right now. There was a study just came out a few months ago about how elephants, especially in Africa, are so critical in spreading seeds.
Right. Seed dispersion is huge.
And they actually spread seeds farther than birds. Because birds will eat the seed and fly and poop. Mm-hmm. And then, some natural fertilizer, right? And then that seed falls to the ground and boom, they spread seeds. But elephants actually, I think it was like 60 miles away or something.
Yeah, they're definitely what's considered in the industry a keystone species as far as helping the environment and being, a top in the environment of what they do and how they help things.
Again, in the last episode, I talked a lot about, the synergistic effect of all the animals and species. So again, this is something we don't think about.
Right. Without them there, who's the domino effect on the dung beetles, for instance, that live off of their dung as their job.
Yeah, our survival depends on elephant poop.
Correct. And our coffee.
And coffee, all right. That's awesome.
But once again, working along man's side, these animals are still with mankind, but perhaps in a different way, either being viewed in a wildlife park, which can help promote saving the people that live around the national parks, giving them jobs, giving them an economy. So those are wild elephants, just being wild elephants, helping mankind. And then secondly, looking at a captive setting, perhaps in zoos and circuses. Circuses they've probably been in historically for a very long time. The menageries, as we all think about and probably had a negative connotation about historically. They were around circuses a lot, which were able to expose children that had never seen or even thought or heard of a creature long before there was encyclopedias and the internet and all the sources we have now. People had exposures to these brilliant creatures and perhaps then got excited about nature and wildlife. And that harkens back to zoos. There are zoos in North America that house both Asian and African elephants. Not every zoo, because they're large animals and they cost a lot to keep, and most zoos do a very nice job and are well accredited and have a highly trained staff to keep them. They're there, though, for educational purposes, to promote conservation, and they, once again, have another another role with humans as far as hopefully saving their own species. Right. And then teaching little ones that perhaps would never have the chance to get to go to Africa the way that I was blessed enough to be able to do that. And so...
And I think, yeah, like, the research we're doing, or I'm wrapping up before I move to New Zealand, looking at using captive elephants and looking at this population that we have in captivity. This is what is really scaring me for elephants, especially African elephants. Like I said, I think Asians should be okay, in the next century or so, but Africans are probably going to disappear. It's because we don't have a sustainable population in captivity that we can turn around and maintain and then hopefully re-release in the wild if they go extinct in the wild.
Right.
And the one study I saw estimates, or their estimate is in 50 years in North America, there will be no elephants in captivity. Which, if there's no elephants in captivity and there's no elephants in the wild,
there's no genetic bank.
Yeah, so it's a really difficult issue, and when you look at, like, again, I'll post that map on the show notes, there's nowhere for them to live.
Right.
And then where they are living, these poachers are cutting into the fence line, getting in there, poaching the elephant, cutting off the tusks, getting out before anybody knows what happens. Right.
Well, and that was kind of going to lead me to my next point as far as the human-elephant conflict. So as much as we have this very interesting culture of working alongside elephants, mostly for our betterment, perhaps now today in zoos and conservation centers, we're working for their betterment. But the conflict of human and elephants, especially in the recent times, has dramatically increased.
Right.
Why there is this human-elephant conflict both in Africa and in Asian countries is mostly because there's just so many people.
Right.
There's so many people, and there is a lot of habitat loss, which elephants, being large animals, large herbivores, need to eat a lot. They require a lot of space.
Right.
And I can't speak so much. Once again, I have not been to Asia. It's on my bucket list. You all will hear about it once I go. But just being in Africa and talking with a lot of local African people, it becomes quite evident that it's easy for me to sit here in my chair and talk on my high horse about how it's just it's an easy fix, give the elephants more room. Well, it's not an easy fix, and it's complex, and I highly suggest anybody that has interest in that to do a little bit more research, because it's going to take a lot of us working together, both here in the States, but then also overseas, and a lot of these groups are trying to do it. And the elephant conflict stems from the fact that historically a lot of African tribes were nomadic, and so they themselves, because in Africa it has some pretty harsh climate in different regions where there's a big difference between the wet season and the dry season. And so crops are only going to grow in the wet season or in certain fertile soils. So the nomads would move around, quote unquote, migrate from point to point in Africa to raise their crops, hunt their game and whatnot. Well, then different cultures came in and basically conquered a lot of the nomads and drew borders and said, this side of the river is Zambia and this side of the river is Zimbabwe.
Right.
And you can't cross, people. Sorry, you have to live here. Your crops, and if your crops don't grow, well, too bad.
Right.
And along with that, it's the same thing with the elephants. The elephants can't cross borders, can't do a lot of until they've lifted some of the regulations. Right. They can't migrate. They can't move to the food where they need
their
the food.
Natural
their
behavior.
Their natural behavior.
Yeah,
their natural cycles and patterns. And so it's what are they going to do? And here's a local African person that's growing 1 or 2 hectares of yummy crops. Well, that's what the elephant's going to go after. And so there's this huge elephant-human conflict for poachers, which we're going to touch base a little bit more. And that one's just ugly and sad and seems like a pretty easy fix. Unfortunately, it's not because of the complexity of the ivory trade.
We've got to find resolutions or these animals are going to be gone.
Right. I think the hopeful news is that there is this conflict, of course, within where the elephants live locally. And then, of course, there's this huge international poaching crisis. Okay. But there's also this history, looking back from the Bronze Age, BC, that we have a long history with these animals. Right. And I think there's a lot of people out there in both and all continents
Right.
that want to fight for them.
Right, there is.
We're just unsure how.
Yeah, and we'll talk some things too, and then that kind of gets at the heart of the issue of all these species. You know, where we opened up last week talking about, you know, we're in this mass extinction event, a lot of habitat loss, a lot of exploitation,
Land fragmentation,
right? Just a lot of problems, and I think there's a lot of people out there that want to do and fight for the environment.
Absolutely.
And maybe this is just one other avenue that
Right.
we can come together and do stuff. All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about elephants. Let's get some more specifics. I know I want to talk about kind of their life cycle and the differences between an African and an Asian elephant.
Yeah, they're really interesting animals.
So African elephants in the wild can live up to be about 70 years old, which is pretty cool.
That's incredible.
Yeah, they live really long. You know, many generations, you know, grandmothers and grandfathers, I know that, but mainly the herd dynamics are female matriarchal societies.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have grandmothers with granddaughters and great-granddaughters all as one herd.
It's the best way to learn.
Right now. And then the males are kind of loners, or they get in little bachelor groups. The Asian elephant, interesting, doesn't live quite as long in the wild.
Okay.
Only 60 years in the wild. And my photo, I guess, in the About Us section on the website is me with probably one of the oldest Asian elephants in the world. They think she's about 77.
Wow.
They weren't sure. She's been around since the 40s, so long time.
Before they could keep track, right?
Yeah. She's had a good life in captivity. They've taken care of her. So females they can stand up, African elephant females can stand almost 9 feet tall at the shoulder, which is 2.5 meters, close to 2.4 meters, whereas female Asian elephants a little bit shorter, about 8 feet. The males can stand up to 13 feet.
Yeah, you know,
The African males.
That's incredible. My kind of elephant viewing experience went from seeing Asians in circuses up close and then to Africa, seeing them in the wild, both male and female. And then I had a chance to see an African male, full grown, in a captive setting. He was in a breeding program. Right. They were working on trying to get these species to breed in captivity because it's not necessarily easy with these large animals. And they were training him for that purpose. Of course, it was a protected contact setting, so I was 10 feet from this impressive. My breath was taken away.
Yeah, they're huge.
Was literally taken away. Not besides how handsome he was, but how massive.
Yeah, they're huge.
They're
huge. 13 feet, that's two of me.
Yeah, they're just, they're very, very impressive creatures. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's like the whole purpose. And they are insane.
Like,
they're just so beautiful. Yeah.
I can still go back that moment in time in my head, and it was just such a game changer because I'd been learning about elephants. Right. I had seen a few elephants, both in a captive and a wild setting. But to see this male close up, because of course in Africa I wasn't that close, and also I was a little scared too since he was charging us.
That'd be a little nerve-wracking.
But so now Asians then.
No, so Asians, the males can get up to about 9 feet, so not quite as tall.
Right. Okay.
So you're talking like up to 9 feet tall at the shoulder, whereas the African bull is almost 13 feet. Or 4 meters, I guess, the African males, and then 2.75 meters for the
you got to get used to this metric if you're moving to New Zealand.
I know. Kilometers, all that fun stuff. Weight. So here's another thing. The females weigh between 5,000 to 7,000 pounds, or 5,000 kilograms. That's the African. The Asian, not much difference in weight, about 6,000 pounds. Wow. So 5,000 kilograms.
And I love myself some megafauna. It's kind of the lingo we use for big animals like horses and zebras and camels. And both Chris and I obviously work very near and dear and closely to horses, and they on average are 1,000 pounds?
Yeah, 1,100 pounds.
For the average type horse, which is still very big.
Right.
So times that by 6?
10. 10, 6? Well, for the males,
Yeah.
It's huge. They're huge. As far as adulthood, they all, both species reach about adulthood around 12. Okay. So they have kind of a long adolescence and childhood. Whereas a lot of, and we know with like zebras and stuff, they're within 2 years, they're full adults.
Correct, yeah.
Whereas elephants.
So elephants are almost like humans or primates. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder we'll definitely do one on chimpanzees, but I think their adolescence, I don't know how many years.
I think
it's pretty long.
Yeah, it's into the teens, I think, early teens.
Yeah, so they pretty similar to kind of us. All right, so the real gist of the issue with these animals is their tusks, right? So we know that pretty much all African bull elephants have tusks. Most African females have tusks. The most Asian males have tusks, but most of the females don't, or half the females don't, or they have really small buds of tusks, so not naturally for them. So really what's interesting about the tusks is those are just teeth.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so they're...
Like an extension.
Right, they're incisors. They're two front incisors that have grown out.
Wow.
And the tusks are really critical because they use them to dig, to root out trees, to defend themselves against predators or anybody else. So they're really an important part of their biology, what does that. So we do know, like the tusks are just like teeth, but they're not like human teeth. They don't have an enamel on them, but they are like the elephant teeth, the structure. So they have like a pulp and things like that. So that's why these poachers have to kill them, because you can't just knock them down and put them to sleep and cut the tusks off, because that will kill them anyways. It's like, yanking out two big teeth.
Yeah, because one of the solutions, I don't think it's worked very well, but with the rhino horn crisis is to just trim the horns.
Right.
But you can't do that with elephants.
No, because it kills them. It kills them. So that's why they poach them too. So yeah, it's really, really sad. And then the other thing that was interesting reading about tusks or knowing about tusks, scientists in the last few decades have noticed that the African elephants that are remaining, their tusks have gotten either shorter or they don't have any tusks at all, because all of the ones that have had tusks have been killed, and so they can't breed and push on their genetics.
Wow. It's like evolution saying, hey, let's save ourselves and get rid of these darn things.
Yeah, no tusks for us anymore.
So sad.
Yeah, so, and then the trunk obviously is critical for the elephants. That's what's one of the iconic things with them. They use it.
Oh, I've been tickled by an elephant trunk.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
It's powerful. 60,000 muscles, crazy. And very, very fine motor control. They can actually pick up a blade of grass. They have so much. Yeah, so their trunks are awesome. Let's talk about behavior. Our favorite, right?
It is one of my favorites for sure. I can just watch an elephant standing there and eating is my happy zen spot. Pretty much any hoofstock animal just standing around eating, which is what they do. But to touch on what you had mentioned, a lot of what sets elephants apart or some of their unique behavioral traits is a lot based in their social structure, that it's very complex for a herd type animal. They have what is known as a fission fusion society. Right. So there's obviously many generations in one herd, but there's also can be multiple family groups that come together during some times to socialize and then other times not. And they split off, a lot of it depending on resources and breeding season and whatnot. So it's always changing for the most part, besides the core element of, like you said, the grandmother, the mother, and the daughters. Right. And herds uniquely can be anywhere from 8 individuals to 100, and mostly female-based and young males. Right. And this does help them out a lot, too, because typically elephants don't have many predators, large elephants, but the young can be very vulnerable, of course, to lions and tigers and whatnot, and they prey on the young. And so a really interesting behavior that's seen is if they're being predated on, that all the females, the adults, will stand in a circle around the young or the juvenile to protect them. And then that predator's not going to have a chance. Right. And so very interesting. And then the males, as you touched on, they're going to be in this herd for anywhere from up to 12 to 15 years, and then they'll break off either by themselves or form bachelor groups. And a really cool, fun job to study elephant behavior over in Asia or Africa has shown that these bachelor groups can actually engage in friendships. Right. And that there's not a ton of aggression which was previously thought. So really interesting stuff that could potentially in the right setting be mimicked in captivity, where typically now bulls, because of their notorious aggressive behavior, all usually live by themselves except for during breeding season. Right. But if we could somehow figure out how to mimic that, then maybe the bulls could live together. Just always a chance to learn how to manage them better in captivity through viewing their behaviors in the wild. Yeah, I think you were talking about dealing with a bull in must in Africa. I mean, one of the ones that we dealt with in captivity, he was in must, and when he charged the fence, I about died. I was only about 5 feet away because he was really aggressive, right? Right. And we'll touch a little bit more on some of their sexual behavior. Right. But yes, no, that's one of they're known for when they are in musth to just be like, I think their testosterone increases 60% or something. So, but the other really iconic thing about an elephant is we've all heard it before. Elephants never forget. There's actually studies out there that show there's some truth to that. Besides having a good memory, especially for a non-human, non-primate mammal, they're also extremely intelligent.
Right. Very.
To the point of where they've been classified to be have similar intelligence to, and on certain levels of primates.
Right.
They can have a lot, and besides just overall how we consider intelligence as smarts, they also are very emotionally intelligent. Mm-hmm. There's been documentation both in captivity and the wild of elephants experiencing joy, anger, of course play, but then also grief.
Yeah. Yep.
So that separates them from a lot of other mammals as far as the complexity of not only their social structure, but then also their individual intelligence. And then the other thing that sets them apart from most mammals is they've been observed in the wild creating tools.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we always think, at first it was groundbreaking when I think Jane Goodall, documented that gorillas used, chimpanzees used sticks to fish out termites. Yeah. The fact that this has been observed in elephants actually modifying twigs and branches to use them as fly swatters.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't know. That is neat. I never knew that one.
Yeah.
I knew a lot about elephants, but
that's
that one
the thing
I've never
is,
heard of.
one of my dreams job is just sit out there and learn about these guys, right? And so I think they've been blowing us out the water what they've been able to do just when what we've observed with them. Right. These species are. And not that should make a difference on whether we save them or we don't save them. But it does set them apart.
Yeah, just what a tragedy.
What a tragedy to lose such a unique animal that's evolved, been able to hang out for this long, become this intelligent, and have this amazing social, live for 70 years, to be wiped out.
It's interesting you talk about how smart they are. I know in South Africa they have to cull quite a bit of elephants as far as to maintain stable populations. So what they actually do is they have to take out a whole family group because they have such great memories and they are so intelligent, because the trauma of seeing, a mother killed in front of a baby or something like that, it just makes me want to cry. Right. Like I'm going to cry right now just thinking about it, that they have to kill them all. Yeah. Because they don't socially adjust well. They have a lot of behavior problems. And at the end, I'm going to talk about my favorite book ever in this person. I'm saving it for the end. And stories about him, but they are just, they're so perceptive, and it's just tragic. It's just tragic. Ugh.
Well, and then just a really kind of interesting science note that has recently just been published and learned about is the fact that these elephants can communicate over long distance using subsonic rumbles. Right. That they travel over the ground faster than sound through air.
It's and low frequency. We can't even hear it.
Yeah.
Humans can't hear it.
So, and then the other elephants that are, gosh knows how far away, pick up on it, and then it can communicate different things through their feet and their trunks, which are very sensitive, and they can learn about potential mates or what their social group may be communicating. And so just the fact that we've only learned that in the past 10 years isn't, what else more, what are secret treasures and hidden things that we can learn from these animals? Yeah. Not only for fun facts, but perhaps for technology we could use. Right. That's the thing. So hopefully we're going to keep hearing more really
and I think,
cool things about these guys.
And we don't necessarily need to talk about it today, and maybe in the future talk about it, but it's like maintaining these large animals in captivity, some of the behavior stuff that, I know you and I doing our research in animal behavior research, that yes, these animals need wide open spaces and need places to move and stuff like that. And zoos are addressing that, especially with these large animals. But again, it's one of those, it's a catch-22. If we don't keep them in captivity and they go extinct in the wild, they're gone. Right. If, like I talked the last episode as far as the black-footed ferret, if we didn't have these black-footed ferrets in captivity, they would be extinct forever. Gone. Forever. Extinction is forever. Mm-hmm. So it's a very complex issue, and we'll save that for another time. But quickly, some more facts that we want to talk about elephants, because again, it's not just about talking about their conservation status, but what are some of the interesting things like that. I didn't know this, Angie. I always thought elephants, I guess just because I've never had to deal with formulating diets for elephants, I just knew they ate a lot. But, yeah.
A lot.
Right. But,
like how much do they eat, just to interrupt really quick?
They eat you a day. They eat one of you a day. They eat about 150 pounds of food a day.
That's a lot.
And I'll say you're probably, that's more than you. Okay, so
I did just have a baby, so you're kind of on the money.
Yeah, so greater than one of Angie's, but not quite me, But yeah, they're like a horse. They have this hindgut fermenter, meaning they eat these plants, they eat leaves, they eat grass, and they ingest that high fiber. And you know this, I mean, being a nutritionist and the stuff you're doing with the rhinos and the horses, the stomach, the bacteria in the stomach, in a cow, say a ruminant, what we call a ruminant, helps break that down. They get nutrients out of that.
Sure.
Well, in horses, we both know, but listeners might not, that happens in the hindgut. After the stomach, after the small intestine, that fiber, that plant material, that hay.
The large intestines, for lack of better terms. Yeah.
Is that what breaks down the fiber? Well, I always thought elephants were like a rumen. They have this big stomach. They actually don't. They actually have a small stomach. It happens just like in horses, which is weird because they're not related to horses.
Not at all.
Very, very, very far down the tree. Their stomach's very small, holds about 13 gallons or 50 liters, so not very big compared to body size.
Which also encourages why they need to eat throughout the day.
Right. That's what they need to eat quite a bit.
And they cover a lot, in the wild, they cover a lot of land in order to keep continual feed in their small stomachs. Because they're not able to eat large meals. Right,
like a predator, like a big lion, just eats half a zebra.
Once a day, every other day,
sleeps all day. Their small intestines about 7 stories tall or 70 feet.
Incredible.
20 meters. And then they're digested pretty quickly. Like it happens it depends on what they eat, like, either 10 to 11 hours up to 46 hours. Do that. So we know that they eat mostly plants. They're herbivores. They eat trees, grass, and like you said earlier.
Wait, do they eat peanuts?
Yeah, they love peanuts. Yeah,
Stereotypes.
I know, total stereotype. They, but love leaves, roots, branches, grass. Bark. They do eat bark.
I definitely saw a lot of that natural behavior in Africa of them rubbing on bark and then also stripping it off.
Yep, they love it. Tastes good. Obviously, coffee beans now. I'm getting that coffee, I swear. They eat about one of you a day for about a 10,000 pound elephant, about 1 to 1.5% of their body weight.
Okay.
And to put that into perspective, we only eat about 5 pounds of food a day. Humans on average eat about that, or 2.2 kilograms.
Unless you're pregnant, and then you're allowed to eat a lot more.
Please do. And then, like we already said earlier, I was going to bring up about the seeds, but why they're important. And I know we're finding in other species too, the microbes from the poop is important for the soil.
Of course.
That helps.
It's all connected, man.
I know. So it helps the grasses, helps the trees.
Well, moving on to my other favorite topic, reproduction, that'll of course have some behavior highlights in there because I just can't get enough of the good stuff. Just briefly, the males, we touched on the fact that they reach their sexual maturity around 15 years old. Their sexual drive isn't that intense until they're a little bit older, maybe usually around the age of 25.
Right.
And so once again, too, I think it's something to consider, which we talked about in life cycle, is it takes a long time for these animals to reproduce. And I'll come full circle, and I'll bring that up when I talk more about gestation. But a male to become sexually mature at 15 or 25 years, and I think it's 13 to 14 years, or 9 years with the females, is a long time.
Yeah.
But once again, we've maybe already touched on it, but for the listeners that aren't as familiar, there's a term for when a male is sexually active and sexually worked up. It's called musts. This is known in both African and Asian elephants, and it's a time of not only increased aggression and looking for a female to breed, but also increased testosterone. Right. In fact, some studies have shown up to 60% increase.
That's crazy.
Which is a lot. Yeah. And so the must is characterized by, of course, different breeding behaviors, which we've seen in other megafauna, such as urinating on himself and his legs to perhaps release pheromones to the females. He'll also do some kind of dominant display behaviors like, oh, I'm the most handsome, tough guy in the world. He'll walk with his head held high, swinging his trunk, which, I mean, I would too, right?
Yeah.
They'll pick up the ground. They'll use their tusks, show how strong their tusks are by marking, and then they'll also make that rumble wave sounds, and then they can even flag one ear at a time. And those are all quote unquote behaviors. But a very iconic part of musk is, if you have ever seen a picture of it or been around one, is they have these glandular secretions kind of next to both sides on this temporal part of
temporal glands,
of their side, and it's their temporal glands releasing this liquid that almost drips down their face, and they almost look like tears, but they're kind of to the side, not by their eyes. And the secretions is this temporin substance, but it also contains a lot of carbohydrates and proteins, and perhaps scientists think maybe pheromones. They're not sure. They also think it might be a reason for some of their increased aggression. I guess when these temporal glands get swollen, that they could be actually painful.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, very interesting. Physiology. I love it.
Yeah.
So figuring the world out one thing, or ourselves out one little piece of information at a time, but that perhaps, these temporal glands are causing this pain underneath the eye, almost like a headache type, that could cause them to be somewhat more aggressive, which of course would help with fighting off other bulls. But in the meantime, perhaps score a lady, right?
Yeah.
So just really unique reproductive biology. Ugh. And then, of course, upon copulation, I think a fun fact, I love fun facts as a scientist, upon ejaculation, the sperm in a female has to travel 2 meters.
Oh, wow.
2 meters.
Yeah, and they're tiny, right? They're microscopic. We
Sure.
have to see.
I mean, there's there's hundreds of millions of sperm, but the one that reaches the egg eventually has to travel 2 meters. And just to put it all in perspective, because that always helps me, I'm a very visual person, a human sperm only has to cover 3 inches.
3 inches.
So just super incredible adaptations that these animals have had to be able to do what they do. Right. And then, and moving on towards a female, once again, her sexual maturity is around 9 years, but she doesn't really become fertile, probably because of group social structure. Fertile and active as far as having calves until she's about 25 years old. Yeah. And then the fertile period is from about 25 to 45 years. The interesting thing there's lots of interesting things, but one of the things for most animals that are only pregnant for 4, 5, 6, 7, months. 8, 9 months, 10 months, which leads us to the gestation length of an elephant. You guys got your seatbelts on? Is on average 22 months, almost 2 years. Yeah,
I was going to ask you, because you just had Zach just turned 1.
Crazy.
So your baby just turned 1, and could you imagine being pregnant for 2 years?
No, I mean, these females are putting a lot of, any woman who's ever been pregnant knows that you give up your body for a long time to gestate your baby for 9 months. But then most of the time it's not over. Then you're giving up your body to lactate or nurse your child, up to a year. Sometimes even longer with some people. And so that's a good 2 years of your life. Well, pregnant elephant's just getting started. 2 years of giving up, or protecting this growing fetus, and then when we talk about lactation, female elephants can lactate. Typically, young elephants will nurse heavily for 1 to 2 years, but it might even continue for up to 6 years. Wow. So this is a long-term investment, which we relate that obviously with humans. That's one of the reasons we've been able to evolve so well, is because of our caring for our young. Right. And there's a lot of similarities with that we're just starting to learn about in the elephant world as far as this investment. And so I just can't, it is a fun fact that they're pregnant for 22 months, but I just can't imagine that. And
I think, this is a critical point to make too, as far as conservation. It does take them 2 years to have a baby, right? Mm-hmm. So their generational gap is huge. They're not, they're not breeding until they're in their 20s. Right. So it takes to repopulate the species, it takes a long term, time investment.
I can't speculate on exactly the evolutionary biology of why, but their birth interval, so the time that they have one calf to the next calf, it's not even every 2 years.
No.
It's like 4 to 6 years, probably because they're they put so much energy and investment in caring for their young.
Right.
And so once again, now we're talking about an animal that doesn't reach maturity until they're 9, but not really good at breeding until they're 20,
right.
and then has a calf every 5 to 6 years.
For 20 years, so they have 4
if they're
or 5
doing
calves.
well.
Yeah, if they're doing well.
And then, in captivity, they don't breed as well. And so, yeah, it's not just going to be something that's fixed overnight.
Right.
Or with some of these species, when they're protected in captivity or protected in the wild, they're able to rebound very quickly because their life cycle is so much faster. And once you get human predation off of them,
right.
Or fix their environment, they rebound very quickly. There's no way that can happen with elephants.
Right. It just
so
takes long,
we need to do more preventatives.
Right.
Because playing catch up is going to be really hard in the end.
And this species, and like I talked about last episode, was the black-footed ferret again.
Mm-hmm.
And we found a population of 17, 18, one family group, and now there's a couple thousand, and they've re-released some in the wild. But again, this is a ferret that breeds quickly, has many babies, can breed probably every year easily, having tons of pups and things like that. Whereas an elephant, it's not going to happen.
No.
Yeah.
No.
It's not going to happen.
So.
Yeah.
Back in the early 2000s, there was kind of a point where it looked like the African population was rebounding.
Right.
So, good news. But the newest numbers suggest that that's not the case, that their populations are both trending downwards, declining for both the African and the Asian elephant. The African elephant populations have declined from 3 to 5 million to right now, like you said, around 500,000. And Asian elephants are around 40,000. Yeah. And so the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN, Chris and I will be talking about that a lot. Yeah. They're kind of the gold standard for keeping track of populations. But unfortunately, it's a difficult task, so it's not like they're updated every year.
Right.
In fact, when I went to the IUCN Red List site for endangered or vulnerable species, their latest update was 2008.
Yeah, so it's been a while. Yeah.
So it's been a while, and things change a lot. And they still have wonderful information out there, and I highly recommend you, if you have a favorite species or a species you're interested in learning more about, to go there. But it's hard to keep it all updated, and unfortunately, the elephant ivory crisis has, kind of thrown a linchpin in everything. Mm-hmm. With both African and Asian species, part of their decline, as we had mentioned, is this loss of habitat and or habitat fragmentation. So they're being, I don't want to say put in a box, but they're being even fenced in and saying, this is where you live, deal with it. And then, of course, if they're either fenced in and or around native local Africans and or Asians, and there's a conflict going on there. Those are huge issues. And then, of course, in Africa, with the African elephants, and even to a little lesser extent, the Asian elephants, is the poaching crisis. And you can't really, unless you live in a cave, you've heard about this. It is definitely, I think, use the word crisis not lightly. It's true. So, that is.
Yeah, it's interesting because you'd think most people would know that, but it was funny because, our friend Danielle, when she was in South Africa a few months ago, and they were out on that safari, and she said, the driver was like, we don't tell anybody, how many elephants we have, how many rhinos, because of poaching. And 2 people, I think they were from Europe, or they might have been from the United States, and they're like, oh, what's poaching? And I was like, are you kidding me?
Wow.
Do you not know what poaching is?
I guess we all live in our own bubbles, right? I'm an animal person, so I know about it.
We know poaching, but illegal killing of an animal, if like people poach deer in the United States or poach alligators here in Florida, they don't have
salmon.
A deer tag or license to go and collect an animal in the wild. So they do it illegally. Well, the poaching, in Africa and around the world is going in and killing these animals illegally. I guess Cecil the lion kind of put some of that, which maybe when we talk about when we get to lions, about how that he was poached because that was an illegal kill. So anyways, yeah. Yeah,
well, and I think it's also hard too if people that either whether we live in a bubble or not, or think a certain way, is, well, why would you want ivory? You don't need ivory. There's plenty of substitutes for piano, keys, or trinkets. And so I think a lot of probably common sense type person, especially in the, that's born and raised in the American culture, is just like, well, that's silly. Not that many people would want ivory.
Yeah.
And I that thinking is, of course, that's my logic. Unfortunately, in other cultures, that's not the logic. And even with all this technology of the internet and being able to have pretty much any database,
right,
or most databases at a keystroke, different cultures have viewed different items in ways different than us.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it very eloquently.
No, and I think, like, talking to our friend who's a researcher, and she, hopefully we can do an interview with her, but she was talking about in China that people don't realize ivory comes from elephants.
Sure.
Right? Or that you have to kill the animal to get it.
Yeah, there's a
knowledge.
There's a lack of education, right. And their grandmother's like, oh, here's this trinket, or with other, for instance, rhino horn, which we'll talk about. Oh, this cures this ailment, right, or whatever, and there's not really. Oh, we've been using it for hundreds of years, so why would I stop now? And so I'm really hopeful, and we can talk more about this at a different point in time, that the younger generations will kind of start asking maybe more questions and making better choices, or more informed choices, perhaps. Yeah. But at this point, it does not seem that that's the case. There is still a huge demand for ivory,
even in the United States. I mean, it's like New York, and I've read some data that it's still being imported into our country, and people are still buying ivory, and an elephant died for that.
Right.
You killed a beautiful, and I mean, just anyway. All right, so let's wrap it up. Let's talk about something awesome, and this is again another story that brings tears to my eyes. And this is one of my favorite people on earth. Now, at some point, we're going to talk about Jane Goodall, because Angie and I were fortunate enough to meet her a year ago. Yes, our hero, one of our heroes.
Definitely an exciting night for sure.
Yeah, she's an amazing woman. This is another one of my heroes, and it was and I will never have a chance to meet this man until I die, and then hopefully I see him up above. And that's Lawrence Anthony. And there's a book out there that I highly recommend, and it's called The Elephant Whisperer. I've listened to it on Audible a couple times.
Like The Horse Whisperer?
It is like The Whisperer, but he's the Elephant Whisperer.
I love that book.
This guy is amazing. And so a lot of what we've talked about, elephants in crisis, he's in South Africa, and he had this reserve with a few animals on it, no elephants. I think he had some rhinos in South Africa, and he got a phone call and said, hey, we have this elephant herd, like talking about using tools. These elephants kept breaking out of their enclosure, their reserve that they were on, and these were trouble elephants, and they were like, we're going to kill them unless you can take them. So he took in this small herd. They actually ended up killing the matriarch before they moved the herd. So they actually took this herd, they bring him into his reserve. He agrees to bring in this small family group. The first day, the new matriarch, the daughter, starts testing the fence, 8,000 volts, like she's messing with the fence. Finally, he goes to bed. He gets a phone call 3 a.m. or whatever it was. Hey, they broke out. She and the other female learned to push a tree down to knock the fence down. Then they went and figured out that the generator was powering the outer fence, so they trampled the generator to escape. Wow. And they were out. And he luckily herded them back in. I think he was using a helicopter to get them back in. And because people were out, because when an elephant escapes, they can kill him.
Sure.
Anybody can kill him.
Yeah, that's not a safe place for an elephant.
Right. So he brought him back, and he decided he was going to move in with the elephants, and so he camped right outside the fence line and started beginning to talk to them. And this is where he got the Elephant Whisperer thing with that. And I'll link some of this in the show notes about him. But this story, like, you listen to this story, and it's just, oh my gosh, this man, it was just amazing. So he died. He died in 2012, about 5 years ago, as of this recording. And when he died, it was the next day, the 2 herds, then he had 1 herd, he brought in another herd that he saved. They made about a 12-hour trek to his house on the reserve. And how did these elephants know that he died? But they hadn't been to the house in a year and a half. They normally would come and and listen to a story. They would come by and spend an hour or 2, drink out of his pool, and then walk off, and then leave. They came, they made a 12-hour trek, both herds, to his house, and they hung out at his house for 2 days the day after he died. And it's like, how did they know? Just finally, this is one of our first beginning episodes, so thank you for staying with us, because
I hope you learned a few things.
Yeah,
I
that's
learned
what we're trying to do, and as we develop this, I'm sure we're going to get better, and the audio quality is going to get better.
We might get worse.
We might get worse, yeah. If we see our numbers go down. But if you can just visit the website, subscribe to the podcast, that's all we would love for you to do. Leave a review, and you can leave some comments.
Please.
We're going to read them and just try to make this the best show we can, and again, develop this community. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Listen, learn, share. Join the movement at allcreaturespod.com.